That's all I know.
Oh, all right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Oh, I gotta not move behind these things. Welcome, everyone, to Temple Emmanuel. I'm Rabbi Michael Lewis. I'm so thrilled to see so many people tonight, which shows us that this show was a hot show. And a lot of people had a lot of thoughts about it. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of the back. Actually, before that, I want to make one announcement before we kind of get into everything tonight. Make sure to check out on December 4th, we're going to be doing a game show here at Temple, Who Knows One, with Micah Hart. It's going to be a lot of fun, so more information is on your sheets there. The story of kind of how this started and what's going to be happening tonight is that I watched the show Nobody Wants This because a million people texted me about it. And I thought we need to do sort of some way to bring it to people to have a conversation about it. And what better way, because the show's about a rabbi and a podcasting group, than my favorite podcasters, David and Tally. Give them a round of applause, everybody. So, besides being dear friends of mine, David and Tally, they both work for American Airlines. They're both Dallasites, and they both, about 2 years ago, started Touche, the podcast, which they just released their 65th episode, which is pretty remarkable. And so we thought tonight we'd do a live recording of their podcast discussing the show Nobody Wants This. And so get ready. We appreciate, I know some folks submitted a couple questions. We might have a little time at the end for Q&A as well. Because we're live recording, we're going to ask people to make sure to stay quiet, to keep your cell phone silenced, to try and keep reactions a little bit, you know, you can laugh when you need to laugh, but to not be shouting out too much. But do feel free to get up and get wine and beer and food and water and things like that throughout the show. Anything else? All right, with that, Touche the podcast.
We're good to go, Gary? Perfect. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Touche the podcast. My name's David, and I'm here with my wonderful, beautiful co-host, Tally.
Hey, David.
As always, be sure to check out Touche the podcast everywhere you can find podcasts. Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher. You see a text box? Look up Touche the podcast.
Follow us on all social media platforms. Send us an email at touchethepodcast@gmail.com. Send us a question for Listeners Lounge. And should we get into it?
Let's get into it. Is there someone else on our podcast today?
I think there is.
Who is that?
We are here with the incredible Rabbi Michael Lewis. I know so many of you guys know him very, very well in the beautiful Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas. And we are here to discuss Nobody Wants This. We're very excited to have you all here with us.
Yes, hopefully everyone in the live audience has already watched Nobody Wants This. Hopefully everyone who is listening to this at home later has watched it. As an FYI, we will be spoiling the whole entire show for you, so now's your chance to get up. Perfect. So, to set the stage and just a reminder for everyone, Nobody Wants This is a Netflix TV show that follows Noah, played by Adam Brody, an attractive and newly single rabbi, and Joanne, who is played by Kristen Bell, the outspoken host of a podcast, as they have a meet-cute and determine if they have a successful relationship despite their differences in lifestyle and religion. It's 10 episodes long and has been viewed for over 45.7 million hours since it premiered on September 26th. So obviously it's a rom-com, but it is still a little relatable because it is loosely based on Aaron Foster's life. So the two creators of the show, Aaron Foster and Sarah Foster, who are daughters of David Foster, created it. Aaron Foster met her husband, Simon Teichman, in 2018. And the first thing that he said was, "I'm only going to marry a Jewish woman." So Aaron Foster ended up marrying him and converting. The show was originally pitched as a docuseries following her journey towards Judaism. However, Aaron was like, that feels kind of boring, I don't really want to watch that. So she decided to pivot it to a scripted series, which was originally pitched with the title Shiksa, which we'll get into a little later. Exactly, everyone. But was then changed to the name Nobody Wants This, which we all know and love today.
It's a good recap. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And so, with that, we have some questions for you, Michael, Rabbi Lewis. And we will ask you some great questions. We'll have some really good open conversation, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. So we're very excited about what's to come tonight. So, first question. As a rabbi, what were your initial reactions to the show? Do you feel like the show accurately depicts, the traditions and the culture of, Jewish beliefs, or do you feel like they're really playing up the stereotypes here?
Yeah, well, first I want to point out one more connection from the show before I get into my answer, which is that the actor who plays the older rabbi, Stephen Tobolowsky, is himself a Dallasite and has temple connections here. So a lot of you might know the Tobolowsky family, and so we are so thrilled to have a connection here at Temple to the show. I loved the show, and part of the reason why I initially loved it is that it is a light, feel-good rom-com about Jews. And right now the world kind of needs positive exposure to Jewish people. And so my first kind of thought is how nice for us to have a Jewish something that isn't about the Holocaust, that isn't about war, that isn't about death and dying. It's just Jewish people living. And so that was my first reaction to the show. And I know there are criticisms of the show and there are things that, might have bothered or upset some people. But I think first and foremost that, how many hours was it?
45.7.
45.7 million hours of people watching about Jewish people was great. The other is that for me, and probably for many of you, it stimulated a lot of conversation about what it means to be Jewish and how do we think about our Jewish identity in this very modern world. And so I loved that the show kind of brought up a lot of questions. I don't know about y'all, but I had many Shabbos dinner tables where we would have conversations about the show and a lot of the things that it brought up. So those are kind of my initial reactions. There were certainly some stereotypes that were played up on. Some of those were LA stereotypes, by the way. For those who spent time in Los Angeles, right? Like there's a little bit of LA that comes across in the show, and I think sometimes people might confuse that with Jewish stereotypes, but some of it might have just been a little Los Angeles. But overall, I thought the show did a really nice job. The moment I fell in love with it was the opening scene where she discovers that he's the rabbi, and her first question to him was, wait a minute, can you have sex? And I was shocked by this. I have been asked that question so many times throughout my life by Jewish people, by non-Jewish people, by people who are interested in dating me, by people who have no interest in dating me. They all ask that question, and his answer was perfect. He said, we're not priests, we're just people. And from that moment, I was sold on the show as being a real kind of insight into the life of a rabbi and the life of what that might mean to be dating someone Jewish.
Definitely. I want to reinforce that LA stereotype. So I'm originally from Northern California, but my whole entire family are New Jersey Jews. So I am a strong East Coast background, and there were a couple things in there that I was just like, this is way too casual, way too chill. This is not how we do it on the East Coast. So I just want to echo that because I very much fixated on that item.
Spoiler alert, I'm actually not Jewish, but I learned so much. I have a lot of Jewish friends here in Dallas, and I knew a lot about, what was ingrained in the foundation and the culture, but I feel like it gave me such a greater appreciation. Just the loyalty and the family orientation and all those amazing qualities. And so I feel like it taught me a lot.
I love Tally that there are some Jewish people that have had some reactions to the show that are like, oh, I'm concerned about the way that Jewish women are portrayed or the way that Jewish people are portrayed. And I love that Tally first said to me, she was like, no, all my friends were like, I want to date someone Jewish now after watching the show. I was like, oh, it's nice to hear from somebody who's not in our own little neurotic world. And people seem kind of normal.
No, totally. And Esther was my favorite character. I know she was kind of a controversial character because there were times where she kind of was being a mean girl to the main character, Kristen Bell, but I adored her. I thought her loyalty to her friend and her family was a beautiful thing, so.
Yeah, I think Tally and I talked about who we would most likely want to get a drink with out of the show, and Esther by far was our number one favorite that we wanted to get a drink with. Interestingly enough, fun fact about the actress who played Esther, that's actually Kristen Bell's best friend in real life. So if anyone has an opportunity to kind of YouTube them together, they have a lot of interesting interviews about how they were able to play off the dynamic with each other, and obviously they enjoyed kind of like hating and making fun of each other throughout the show, as all best friends do.
Well, I want to get a drink with Adam Brody. So,
second that.
Obviously. So now we're getting into a little bit of the spoilers of the show. So the final scene ends at the bar mitzvah, and they talk about the conversion and that Joanne would have to convert in order to continue the relationship with Noah, and they kind of go back and forth, leave it a little open. And I think that's where I have the most questions for you, Rabbi Lewis, is what if Noah was kind of one of your rabbi friends and he was venting to you about the situation? You guys were getting a drink. What would you say to him? What have you learned throughout the periods of being a rabbi? Like, how do you navigate? What's right or wrong, or like what would you do?
Yeah, it's not easy, and I think that's part of what makes the show a little bit of a Romeo and Juliet-esque dilemma. So the Reform movement, which is, so in Judaism there are kind of three main streams. There's Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. The Reform movement is the one that has the least amount of rules on rabbis. So if you're going to become a conservative rabbi, you basically agree to keep a kosher home, only eat at kosher restaurants, you have like certain rules that you have to follow. The Reform movement, we have, all Reform rabbis are part of an association called the Central Conference for American Rabbis. And we have an ethics code that we have to follow. So we can't, we get in trouble if we like embezzle funds or abuse somebody. But we don't have anyone telling us that we have to keep kosher. We have to like kind of practice Judaism in a certain way. There was, up until this year, a rule at the rabbinical school. So the Reform Rabbinical School had a rule that you couldn't be dating somebody who wasn't Jewish and also get accepted into the rabbinical school or be ordained. So up until this last year, HUC, the Reform Rabbinical School, had a rule that rabbis had to be dating Jewish people. It's a complicated question because a rabbi's life is not one we're involved in a part of the community just as anyone else in the community is, but also happen to be the rabbi, and so therefore our lives are involved too, and our partners are involved too. My boyfriend's over here somewhere. Hi, Jake. Wave. There you go. Right? They're also a part of the community as well, and so I think that was the part of the reason for why HUC had that rule. They just changed it. I don't think HUC, if there was someone who was marrying a rabbi who was, actively going to a church, I think that would probably be an issue for them still. But for someone in Joanne's situation who was sort of I love that episode where she said, "You made me miss my first Shabbat." Right? That was great. For someone who sort of has a little bit of Jew curiosity in her, that I think the rabbinical school would have to seriously weigh whether or not they would accept a student in that case.
Definitely. And so I know a lot about conversion is that you're not necessarily supposed to be told to convert. It has to be Joanne on her own, right? So how would you navigate, would you give Noah any advice on how to not convince her to convert, but she has to do it on her own. So they have the Havdalah scene, which is his big thing, trying to convince her, be don't you want to join this?
Yeah, I thought that scene was painful, but they did that by design, right? That was intentionally he was forcing this thing that he doesn't normally do into his own life to try and make it seem appealing to her, as opposed to just being himself, right? Up until the point where he felt pressured to drop the conversion word, he was kind of just being himself. And then once that happened, he felt like he had to show off some sort of certain, this is how awesome, or this is what Judaism is. It's for a non-rabbi, I would say, it's a pretty common path for somebody to meet somebody who is Jewish and to go. There's a player for the Sacramento Kings, Domantas Sabonis, and this is exactly what happened to him. He met this nice Jewish girl and started going to her family's house for Shabbat dinner, and he was like, that's cool, this is nice. And it evolved over the course of a couple of years, and he eventually decided to convert to Judaism, and he's going through the process right now, converting with a conservative synagogue in Los Angeles. And I think that's a kind of a way it can progress out on the pace of what the person is. You see this a lot also when people are having a non-Jewish partner, their kid is having a bar bat mitzvah, where they're kind of maybe I should, maybe I want to do this too. Maybe I actually want to kind of formally be a part of this. The trick is with rabbis, it gets a little weird, right? There's a little bit of kind of pressure on, we like to think that we're just like anybody, we're not priests, we're people, right? That we're just kind of like anybody else. But I think what's neat about the show is it brings up that tension line. I don't know what I would suggest them to do. I think it's the synagogue was coded as a conservative synagogue, but in a lot of ways he was coded as a reform rabbi. And so I think it would be totally dependent on the community and what their level of acceptability was of having him have a partner who was in exploration or thinking about it, but hadn't necessarily officially decided yet.
No, I think that makes sense. So do you think in that kind of one of those final scenes where Kristen Bell's talking to his fiance, at the event, and she's like, you understand, if you convert, you're the first lady of the temple, you have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things to do. And so, in a way, Kristen Bell needs to really want that too, because she's gonna have a lot of responsibilities if she converts.
It's changed in the last 30 years for sure, right? Like, I think that 30 or 40 years ago, you would have had, a little bit more pressure on the partner of the rabbi than there is today. I think, before women could become rabbis, a lot of women who were interested in doing the rabbinic role without doing it married a rabbi and then played the role of the rabbi in the synagogue in their capacity as the rabbi's wife. We've made some great progress in that now women can just be rabbis. So that I think is there is I think a cultural shift that's occurred in that way. I mean, David, you have your own interesting story with conversion to Judaism in your own family. Do you want to share a little bit about your kind of thoughts on conversion and how it's impacted your own life?
Definitely a perfect pivot. So I first want to address, want to go back to the reaction everyone had when the show was originally pitched as Shiksa, because this was something that I dealt with throughout the whole viewing of the show. As some background, I come from an interfaith marriage. My mother was raised Catholic and my father was raised Jewish. Essentially, I was also raised Jewish. The story goes, who knows whether this was actually the conversation or not. They decided if it was a boy, they were going to raise him Jewish, and if it was a girl, they were going to raise him Catholic.
I would not recommend that to a couple today if someone was coming to me with that suggestion for the path forward, but
you're here. I assume that's the abridged conversation of what they actually have, and they're like, it's not worth telling me. So, but growing up, when my mother and father got married, it was very easy to find a rabbi to marry them for interfaith marriages, but it was actually extremely hard for them to find a priest to marry them, and they actually ended up not finding a priest who would marry them, so they had a rabbi who they're still friends with today, which kind of disengaged my mother from Catholicism a little bit growing up, which, fast forward, I went to Hebrew school, I got bar mitzvahed, and my mother was the biggest champion of us going to services. She was there for my whole bar mitzvah. She made sure that we had the best bar mitzvah party ever, because it's like a little bit of a competition with your Hebrew school class, whether people don't like to admit that or not. And growing up, we kind of moved, but also bopped between reform and conservative temples due to their different views on accepting interfaith couples into their congregation. And the first time I heard this word shiksa was from some extended family members, as well as individuals in other congregation talking towards my mom. And of course it was used in, I want to hope, not fully a malicious way, but it was used in a joke where it was clearly meant to other her. So it's always been a slightly derogatory word in my opinion. And if you Google it, because I was like, I don't know the actual definition of shiksa, I'm just going off what I learned growing up. Google actually shows a notification saying it's an often disparaging term, which, continuing on, my mom has kind of reclaimed the word shiksa because, once again, she goes to services more than I do. I'm not going to lie about that. And I have this memory when I was in high school. I was 16 years old, so I'd already been bar mitzvahed. I was just being an annoying teenager. It was Saturday morning, and I was like, why do we have to wake up for services? I already paid my dues being bar mitzvahed. It's so early on a Saturday. And my dad was still getting ready. His Hebrew name is Shlomo, which we nicknamed him Slow-Mo. So nobody was in our front door, except I walk down the stairs and see my mother. She's fully dressed for services, looking beautiful, has her sunglasses on, has her car keys in. And I can picture her now. She looks at me and my dad coming down late, and she's like, I just want to point out that the shiksa was ready for temple. So it's now used as a super endearing term that I'm comfortable with my mother saying. towards herself, but I've seen individuals use it in a negative way towards my mother. So I actually had a huge negative reaction to the show where they used it so casually, and I know we all have different opinions on that word, but I personally just can't even fathom that word being the title of the show when I've only seen it to extremely other individuals in a completely negative way.
I heard Adam Brody was the one who was like, that's too cringy, you can't actually call the show Shiksa, because it was like, he was uncomfortable with it.
Yes, he had so Kristen Bell is married to Dax Shepard, and Dax Shepard has a wonderful podcast. Adam Brody talked about the show, and he was like, other than the fact that a lot of focus groups they did on the show had no idea what that word meant, which, thank goodness. He was like, this has only been used negatively towards women that I know in my life, and I just can't imagine moving forward on a show like that. So I don't know, for individuals who maybe didn't know the word before, like, you felt that the word wasn't seen as a negative word in the show, or did you?
No, I didn't, and I didn't know enough about it. Like, even I was texting you as I was watching. I'm like, what's a shiksa? It's like, what is it so cute? Like, what is that name? I had no idea. And then I learned after having conversations with these two. But I am curious though, like, how has your mom's relationship kind of evolved over time with your grandmother and your family?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, to just be super transparent with everyone, the getting me through my bar mitzvah was kind of like her gold medal Olympics of being non-Jewish. She's like, I got your grandson bar mitzvahed, and I'm the oldest, and transparently one of the oldie cousins who got bar mitzvahed in my family. So, like I said, she is at services every Friday and Saturday. She's the one reminding us of high holidays, and for personal reasons, she has not converted to Judaism, but to call her shiksa in a negative way would be.
Other than this, like what you guys have been hearing, like, do people actually use this term?
I think it's much less so than probably it was 20 or 30 years ago. I'm seeing some nods of people saying, yes, we have used it in the, you know, it's so interesting because derogatory words, to be effective in their derogatoriness, need to be accepted broadly in the society. And this word is it's like an inside baseball derogatory word, right? Like, it's for the people who know it, you know it, and for everyone else, you're like, what? What is this word, right? And it kind of makes you think a little bit about how we use language and how we use words culturally. You know, like, there are certain words that Jews use that are cultural for Jews that, like, if you said to a non-Jewish person, they wouldn't necessarily understand. And it's funny that within that there's a category of derogatory words too. It makes me think, like, there've got to be other cultures out there that have other derogatory words that we have no idea about that are being used that are kind of like, oh, is it a good word or a bad word? And I think, you know, there's also been, with the sort of rise of Jews marrying non-Jewish people, I think that's also ripped some of the Band-Aid of the pain of it off. Whereas, the Pew data, don't quote me on this, but I think in like the 1960s and 1970s, about 18% of Jews were marrying non-Jewish people. And today, if you include Orthodox Jews, it's like 60%. And if you include non-Orthodox Jews, if it's just Reform and Conservative Jews, it's like 70% or so. So because you're seeing a lot more non-Jewish people marrying Jews, now I think a lot of people think of that as, we're doing things wrong. For several centuries, there weren't really conversions to Judaism because, like, it wasn't allowed, right? Like, there wasn't in both Christian and Muslim countries, if you converted to Judaism, you were breaking a law and you weren't able to do it. So we lost the muscle of having non-Jewish people come into the story that we have been able to regain by having the freedom to kind of be ourselves in America, and having the freedom to then have somebody meet somebody who is Jewish and then fall in love with them and able to be kind of a part of it. When the Israelites leave Egypt after the 10 plagues in the Torah, in the Bible, right? There's a line in the Torah that says, a mixed multitude went out with them, right? That from the beginning of the story of the Jewish people, there were always people who were not Jewish who kind of said, well, these Egyptians are kind of crazy, and those were some crazy 10 plagues, and that Moses guy seems to know a lot about what's going on with them. I'm going to follow him instead and go along with it. And so I think it's part of the evolution of the change has also been comfort with non-Jewish people coming into Jewish homes, the way that your mom has, David, over the course of her life.
Definitely. I mean, not to put you on the spot with this, Michael, but Rabbi Lewis. Ooh, sorry. From your experience, participating in the congregation and looking at the Hebrew school, would you say you see a lot of interfaith marriages at Temple Emmanuel?
I think if we asked people at Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur the non-Jewish partner to stand up, probably, I'm guessing 25 to 30% of the room would stand up. I would love if, someone else who knows more than me would actually probably be able to give you a better figure on that. But yes, we have and part of what I think the Reform movement is such a fascinating stat in the Pew Study. The Pew Study, for those who don't know, is they every, 6 or 7 years, they do kind of a deep dive onto what's going on in the Jewish community. And one of the things they found is that 30 or 40 years ago, if you married somebody who wasn't Jewish, you were more likely to then fall out of Judaism altogether. Whereas today, there's been an increase. If you marry somebody who's non-Jewish, you're actually still more likely to participate in Jewish life, to have Jewish kids, to raise a Jewish family, and that's because the Reform movement and synagogues like Temple Emmanuel have said, we're going to make a place for you here. We're going to kind of let you figure out your spot here and let you feel welcome here in a way that then your kid can be raised as a Jewish kid. You.
All of me. Yes.
All of you.
Living proof right here.
Living proof right here.
No, I think this is great. I do think this is actually a really good pivot into, the show's about dating. We joke that it's about the forbidden love, Romeo and Juliet, all of those good things. So, if you are willing to answer, can you talk about some of your dating experiences? How do you look at, previously, Jake, close your ears on this one. How before you met Jake, what was it like? Did you consider dating people who were not Jewish? What were your takes on all that?
Yeah, so, when I became a rabbi, I had no idea that people were going to have such a diversity of reactions to it. I think a lot of people have rabbi baggage, and some of it's good. David has good rabbi baggage. He has a good relationship with his rabbi. When he met me and I said I'm a rabbi, he was like, that's really cool, and was interested and engaged with it. Jake, who I'm dating, when Jake and I were set up the old-fashioned way, we're like the only under 40 couple that I know that met through a blind date. And so the story goes, I was doing my chaplain training at a hospital in Los Angeles at Cedars-Sinai, and the social worker on my floor and I hit it off, and her name is Rachel, she's Jewish, and at some point we started having a conversation, and we kind of said, if you know any nice Jewish boys, if you know any nice Jewish boys, maybe we can do a little setup. I still haven't met my end of the bargain yet. But Rachel said, I have this friend from college. He just moved back from Chile, where he'd been living for a couple of years, and he's very sweet and cute, and you should get to meet him. And so I said, all right, that sounds good. And Rachel goes out to dinner with Jake, and Jake is like, a rabbi? I don't want to go on a date with a rabbi. It's literally the opening scene when they're at the table, and it's like the kind of gross guy with the beard who's like eating his food all weird, right? That's what Jake thought. I see him nodding. He's like, that's what I thought. And then 3 weeks later, he was like, the dating apps are boring. I guess I'll go on a date with this guy. And it turned out I was somewhat normal. And here we are, right? So it's kind of fun, and David and I play in a cornhole league together here in Dallas at S4, which is one of the gay bars in Oak Lawn. In cornhole, your teammate is on the opposite side from you, so you end up kind of standing next to someone you don't necessarily know. And a couple weeks ago, after this show came out, by the way, I was talking to this random person, and he said, what do you do? And I just thought, here we go, right? Like, what's the reaction gonna be? Is this person gonna be like a total closet anti-Semite? Is this person gonna have really weird religious trauma from some sort of church they went to and freak out, right? And it's like, so, I'm kind of trying to figure out a little bit of like, what do I actually say to this person? And sometimes I just say, it depends on my mood, really. There are some days where I'm like, whatever, I'm a rabbi, and deal with whatever their reaction is. And there are some strange reactions. And the show was really helpful, because I said, have you seen the new show? Nobody wants this? And they said, yes. And I said, well, I'm Adam Brody's character, just not as cute.
Not true.
Don't sell yourself short.
Oh, come on.
So I think something that you kind of brought up already, Michael, in that is, as Michael alluded, I had a great relationship with my rabbi growing up, and the Rabbi Braun, who bar mitzvahed me, love her forever. But it's a very different relationship than a priest to God, as you said. You know, rabbis are noted as being close to God, not like the next person who's going to talk to them, such as a priest. And I think a lot of the questions that, like, you know, Tally and I have talked about, and individuals who are non-Jewish watching Nobody Wants This have asked me kind of like, this, it's so crazy because they grew up in churches where this show could literally never be about their clergy at all. None of this could happen. So, one, want to know kind of like debunk that for the listeners at home and individuals in the room who might not exactly know, but also, what did they get right and wrong about being a rabbi? I know watching a show about your occupation must be completely frustrating, but
it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, there was a great movie about a rabbi and a priest called Keeping the Faith that everyone should watch.
My favorite movie.
One of my teachers actually taught Adam Sandler how to put on the big talit for that movie, which is my claim to fame. So Keeping the Faith, that was like 2003 or something. It's an oldie.
If you haven't watched it, it's actually one of my top 10 movies, so please, please, please watch it.
So here's the trick. Judaism is a religion, okay? But Judaism is also not a religion, right? You can be, when you're becoming a member of a synagogue, you don't have, there's not like do you believe in God, right? Like, do you think that God handed the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai? And you have to answer yes for that. Whereas I think Christianity is dogmatic in that it's based on belief and predicated on belief, and belief is the first step in Christian. I'm not an expert in Christianity, but that's my understanding, is that kind of belief is the first step in Christianity. That's not the case in Judaism. By the way, I've got a lovely proof text on this. The first commandment isn't a commandment. It doesn't say the first of the 10 commandments. It doesn't say believe in God. It just says, I am God, right? Whatever that might mean. And so I think there's more room in Judaism to debate and disagree, and at the end of the day, there's an element, and this is where it gets kind of interesting with conversion stuff, is there's an element of Judaism that is ethnic, right? There's an ethno-national kind of like Jewish identity in some sense. I'm sure many of you in the room have experienced this. Whenever I go travel anywhere, I go and find the Jews, right? Like, it's the thing that I do wherever I go, is you find the synagogue. And I was in Berlin in January of 2020, and I reached out to somebody, and the next thing I knew, I was going to a synagogue and found myself at a Shabbos dinner with a bunch of young Berlin Jews, right? And so there's sort of some peoplehood connection in Judaism that makes it fundamentally different than Christianity. And I think a lot of times I think when people talk about religion in America, they talk about Christianity, and then using the context of Christianity, they try to define everything else. Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, they try to describe it through the lens of Christianity. And I think a little bit of what I try and do is to remind people that Judaism, it's different. It's a completely different way of thinking about kind of who and what the people are. No, we're not a religion, right? We're in a synagogue, right? We're in the living room of the synagogue, but we're in a synagogue, right? And we do have, very much like some elements and aspects of our tradition that are very religious. And there's some things that Christian religion borrowed directly from Judaism. But in that way, life is kind of different than it would be for a priest. In terms of connection to, there's no sort of special rabbinic connection to God. Rabbi means my teacher. And rabbis today are basically, 500 years ago, rabbis had a lot of power in the community. Today, we're basically teachers who can marry you and things like that, right? That's kind of our role in the community. And so I think, it's for an individual Jewish person, if they want to have their own spiritual connection in some form, they're going to do that that's something that they can find. Hopefully they can find that in the synagogue, right? On a Friday night, on a Saturday morning, on Shabbat, or whenever. But that's something that kind of can emerge from the individual as opposed to being facilitated by some other human person.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense.
Was there anything that you were annoyed that Noah did, that you were like, no way a rabbi's doing that?
Hey, okay, he's so fast on his feet. He's so quick at answering, and I'm like, I need more time to think about things. Was there anything that Noah did that annoyed me? He was pretty good. I mean, honestly, it's hard to annoy me when it's Adam Brody because I was just so distracted by how cute he was that I couldn't get upset at him. You know, I loved this. This is not an answer to your question, but I loved the camp. I loved the camp episode. And again, that was sort of the first time where he was dancing around, right? Like, how do I introduce this person? What's the, you know, I have my teens here. I love when she discovers the teens and they actually call him Hot Rabbi and she's shocked by that. It was cute. I also loved, look, there's been some criticism of, you know, the show portraying Jewish women in a negative light. And I think there's, you know, certainly some validity to that. I loved the rabbi character there because she was a woman and she was his mentor and she was older than him and she was guiding him. And I loved that relationship and how they kind of portrayed it and framed it. I also loved her parents, by the way, like total random aside. They were great characters, amazing characters.
At that camp scene, did you understand why he was so kind of finicky and worried about that his rabbi, his boss, the head rabbi, actually came and he was kind of hiding her? Do you feel like it made sense, or?
You know, it's not so realistic. First of all, that like his meeting randomly ended and he went to camp. All the clergy here agreed. No rabbi has that much time, right? Like that is, but it's Hollywood, right? They're like, it's a show. I think, you know, and this is something, Talia, I want to hear a little bit more from you about. One of the pieces of the show that Joanne's character gets at is about how real you have to be on a podcast. And up until that point, I think Adam Brody's character was being, that's how I refer to him as, was being really real about himself and who he was. You know, she asked him, are you gonna have some sort of like crisis of faith right now? And he's like, no, I love my job, like I love what I do. But that was kind of the first moment where he wasn't being real. And when you're not able to be your authentic self, you're gonna run into that tension. Look, it's a little bit like, you gotta cut, like, if you're in the closet with something, you're gonna feel awkward about it, you're gonna feel uncomfortable about it, right? And so he kind of has he has to have his coming out about it, and because he doesn't have his coming out, it kind of all becomes a disaster. To make the gay analogy, I don't know, it feels kind of like an apt one right there. And I, you know, I'd love for you guys as podcasters, you guys have to share a lot of stuff about yourself on the show, and that's such a neat tension point on the show where they're like, how much do I share about this hot rabbi I'm going out with on the show? Right. How do you guys deal with that, having a podcast with like sharing yourself?
Well, listen, the topics they discuss are much different than the ones we discuss. So everybody knows. My dad listens to my podcast, so. No, I do think that, I do respect her for being authentically herself the entire time, but I mean, I know I speak for both of us here when David and I say that we've discussed dates, people we have gone on dates with. We always give everybody nicknames. We never, you know, call anybody out directly. But we've gotten in trouble a couple times, so I understand the worry of maybe dating someone.
How you come off to people, because in your head you're like, oh, I'm so real, I'm being honest, this is the tone I'm using. And then you listen to a recording of yourself, which is god-awful, and I have not gotten used to it yet. But you just realize how much you censor yourselves subconsciously, and a lot of kind of being interesting is being authentic. And I mean, I'm gonna be authentic about this. Tally and I, we are basically siblings at this point, and I would say even today, we got into a 1-second tiff about...
We did?
Kind of about the caffeine thing.
Oh, yeah.
About just like someone not being as honest on the podcast, or someone like not being able to share a really fun story because we are nervous about how we'll be portrayed or we don't want other people seeing.
Yes.
So that part of the show, they got spot on, but also it's kind of just like a little bit of a life lesson that if you're hiding something, you should look within why you're hiding it, and just, your authentic self is your best self. So just be true to yourself is kind of how I took that.
Absolutely.
I loved the scene where Joanne is coaching him on that, and then he has that meeting with the couple who are kind of struggling to open up to him about their own, feelings about their marriage 6 months in, and he kind of has Joanne in the back of his head, and he's like, oh, I'm going to share a little bit about my stuff too. Now that's not a great, that's not, you don't always want to do that, right? And that's not necessarily, sometimes that ends up, you're making it all about you instead of all about the person, and so there's kind of there's a line with that a little bit too, right? Therapists go through this big time for sure, anyone who, I don't know, I've got a great therapist, right? It's something that everyone should have a great therapist. It's a good thing to have that kind of to know that there's a line and a boundary, but also kind of be comfortable sharing a little bit of you and yourself with it.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So Q&A.
Yeah.
So I know there was baskets out there for Q&A. We did get one question. So after I read this, if anyone else is feeling spicy and wants to come up and ask a question, please do. So the one question that we got was from Mike, so shout out Mike, thank you so much, Mike. Here's Mike's question. Well, also, is Mike in the room?
Yeah.
Mike, where are you? Don't be shy.
There you are. I was like, wait a minute, why are you looking at
Mike, we love you. Okay, that's a great question.
Do you want to ask the question, or do you want me to?
You ask it,
Okay.
You ask it.
Okay. Which I'm actually intrigued about this too. Can a rabbi really smoke pot?
I think in the state of Texas, my legal answer has to be no comment.
Well, this will be broadcasted, so smart move. Smart move.
Are there any other questions for Rabbi Lewis, or a commentary you want to make on the show, or anything?
Yes. Do you?
Let's go. Let's start back over there. Yeah.
Rabbi, take it.
Oh, Gary's bringing
Gary's
the mic.
bringing the mic. Let's start back over there.
Can you talk about his mother?
Oh, yeah.
In the context of the question that came up early in the talk tonight about was it realistic, or did they just really run amok with the stereotypes?
I don't think there's any universe in which she would have actually eaten all that pork. That was pretty funny, right? That was like a Hollywood laugh. At first when I was watching the show, I thought it was so interesting that they made them that they were former Jews from the former Soviet Union, and I didn't realize until I learned that that's Simon Tickman's family, right? His parents were from the FSU, because in LA, honestly, it would have been Persian Jews, right? That's who dominates in LA, and I would have expected them to be Persian at this point. First of all, I love Tova Feldersha. I think she's a great actress. I thought she did a fabulous job portraying that. I mean, she nailed it, which was great. It's hard. It's hard. She comes across as the stereotypical overbearing Jewish mother, for sure. And right, I don't know. There's ways in which it can be real, of giving up her little boy, her successful little rabbi boy that she's so proud of. Think about her life a little bit, right? She was born in the former Soviet Union. Being Jewish was squashed there. It's a remarkable community that we don't talk enough about. We do here because we've got Cantor Glicken and her family, and she brings that direct experience to us live, right, from her own life story. But then she gets to go off to America and live and have her son kind of proudly be Jewish. And so for her, kind of having the immigrant story to then have, it seems like his perfect life is set up for him and it's all happy for her, and then all of a sudden he ruins it, she's gonna be frustrated with that. There was a certain level of it that's clearly Hollywood, clearly trying to have fun, make fun of itself, for sure, as well. But I get why people might have taken it the wrong way or been a little uncomfortable with it. I loved that the Jewish people on the show, almost all were played by Jewish actors and actresses. They nailed that, right? Adam Brody, Jewish, Kristen Bell, not, right? That's the, and having Tova Feldersha in that role, I think allowed them to play with it more than had they had somebody else. 30 years ago, that would have been Barbra Streisand, by the way, right? That would have been the role she would have played, and she would have been great at it. Great question. Other questions? Other thoughts? Yeah, in the back.
Hi, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on the ending. I know you said that there will be spoilers, so I don't really feel bad asking this at all.
Don't.
Right, I don't. I just know there were a lot of mixed reviews on Adam Brody's character, kind of implying that he's gonna give up being head rabbi to be with Joanne. I guess I'm just for me, it just felt unrealistic given, for me, I interpreted the show as he's a conservative rabbi because I feel like the show just wouldn't exist if he were a reform rabbi. This just wouldn't be a source of conflict at all. So I would just love to know y'all's thoughts on that, how, especially for Rabbi Lewis, how does someone just overnight just decide, yeah, this isn't for me, when the whole show leading up to this plot or climax, it's been his dream, you know?
Yeah, I will say, great question. I'm not 100% sure it wouldn't be challenging for a Reform synagogue too. I think there are some Reform synagogues where it'd be easier, but I think I'm looking at we have some rabbi parents here, and I'm kind of curious their thoughts about this. But I don't, I think that there are ways in which it would be tough at a Reform synagogue, equally at a conservative synagogue, equally at a Reconstructionist synagogue. It just kind of depends on the where and the what. And I don't know, maybe it's different in Vermont. I have no idea, I've never lived in Vermont. In terms of him giving up his, first of all, I'm also not convinced we know what's gonna happen yet. They said there's gonna be a second season. He made a decision in an act of love in a Ross and Rachel getting on the airplane at the end of Friends way, right? It was cute, and I think they needed to end the show cute. I'll be curious to see in the second season whether or not, how they roll with that. And if there's a way in which he can kind of square the circle in this situation. It's not just rabbis that have to deal with balancing professional considerations and families. That's something that every person has to do at some point. When you choose to be with somebody else, when you say, I'm gonna get married, you're basically saying, I'm gonna be making my life decisions in conjunction and in coordination with another person. And hopefully there's some simpaticoness, that's not a word,
We'll go with it.
Okay, great, thank you. The decision is made together, but I think it's a situation, anyone, look folks, we live in Dallas, people move here all the time because they got a job here, right? Goldman Sachs is gonna be moving their stuff here soon, there's gonna be a lot of Goldman Sachs people that are showing up I moved here from New York because I got a job at Goldman Sachs. And there are probably gonna be some partners that are I don't wanna leave New York and go to Dallas. I know some people in this room that said that, right? And I think so it's what I appreciate about it is it's something that's a real situation for anyone and everyone, is how you balance you and your partner's own professional ambitions with how you actually want to live and structure your life. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let's go with Sarah. Sarah, you want Sarah? One of the Sarahs. I'll let you guys both, you got both Sarahs. Let's hear from both of you.
How realistic do you think it is for being a show set in LA and having the main character be very LA, and I guess you can answer that having moved here from LA, that she had no idea what the word Mazel Tov, Shabbat Shalom, is that Hollywood-esque artistic license? I feel like those are common knowledge enough words in today's society. Where do you think that fell in the realistic spectrum?
Okay, this is my biggest pet peeve with the show, that there's absolutely no way that her class that she graduated middle school and high school with was not majority, okay, let's say 20% Jewish at most, at least. She's never been to a bar or bat mitzvah, she doesn't know what Shabbat is, it's like she was just placed on this earth the day before they filmed. I don't understand what the point is either. If you listen to the Foster Sisters podcast, who are the creators of the show, they get into this a little bit, but I think that they actually annoyed people more so than making it seem endearing, is how at least I took it.
I'm curious, Tally, your thoughts on this. I don't know, does the word Mazel Tov, is that in your lexicon?
I mean, I don't use it on the daily, but I'm very familiar.
Yeah, when we first met, you knew I was Jewish, and like everything that Joanne was like, what? You knew already.
No, definitely. It was. I think they were kind of over amplifying like her kind of this dumbness to that, just to maybe make her more endearing, or I don't know what they were doing, but.
Actually, I've got 2 fun facts about this. These come from Sarah Benor, who teaches at the rabbinical school in Los Angeles, and she has 2 amazing facts. One is the use of Yiddish words by non-Jewish people, and there's a correlation between the number of Jewish friends they have and the use of Yiddish words, okay? So I forget what the word was that she used, but it's not like schmutz or something like that, right? That like, it wasn't schmooze, because the schmooze is the second point. Whatever it was, that if you have 10 or more Jewish friends, you've got like a 95% chance of knowing and using the word. But if you have no Jewish friends, there's still like a 30% chance you know the word, because like you watch TV, right? Which I think is cool. The other one she uses is schmooze. Jews and non-Jews use the word schmooze differently, which I think is fascinating, and I've seen this in real life. So Jews, we use the word schmooze as in a podcast. We're schmoozing. We're just chatting with each other, right? Non-Jewish people use the word schmooze, this was a little learning for me, to like schmooze somebody up. You're trying to like get something out of somebody. Probably a little anti-Semitism in it, that's all right. But the word schmooze is used differently. So I think it's a neat, look, we are 2% of America. We're like 10% of Los Angeles. We're 1% of Dallas, 1.5% of Dallas. I think it's a neat moment for us to take a little pride as a Jewish community of our impact in the world, that like our language that we don't even speak is somehow like impacting the culture on a wider level.
Yeah, you told me a fun one yesterday. We were talking about small bites. Nosh?
Nosh?
Yeah, I learned nosh, and I'm going to be using that.
There you go. See? Sarah, last question. Other Sarah?
So I have a question. Let's say season 2, she does decide to convert. Would her going through the synagogue that he works at pose any ethical problems? And obviously, I have some feelings about this subject, but are there any reasons you would discourage someone from converting?
Love that. Discourage someone in general, or discourage...
Sure.
In general? Yeah. So first of all, yeah. I mean, in a place, your different situation if the show is taking place in Shreveport, Louisiana, than in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, definitely, I would say, go to a different synagogue, take your conversion class somewhere else. Noah should not be the rabbi on her Beit Din, on her court that goes through the conversion process with her. Yeah. For those who don't know, the conversion process in Judaism is not an easy thing. It takes years, often, and it requires extensive Jewish learning, followed by for males something called Hatafat Brit, which is a sort of representation of circumcision, and then dipping in a mikvah, which is a ritual bath. And then I got the order wrong, going before a court of 3 people, at least one of whom needs to be a rabbi. That's kind of the process of conversion, and it's a pretty big deal. There are certainly cases and times where I think Judaism is not the right path for people. The Talmud has a discussion for anything. The Talmud is the Jewish kind of law code. It's a great Jewish. It's got a lot of stuff in it. It's a big Jewish book from like the 2nd and 3rd centuries that discusses all sorts of topics. And in the topic on conversion, they say, if someone says, I had a dream and I said I should be Jewish, we're supposed to say, no, thank you, right? So they do kind of give examples of reasons why one should not go through conversion. Interestingly, in the Talmud, one of them is not because you're marrying someone Jewish, which is funny because the most common, and I think the most also like the easiest, is like when somebody is already living a Jewish life because they're marrying somebody Jewish. Not that I think it's kind of interesting that the Talmud has that as a negative, and today I think we view that as a very normal path of going through the process of conversion. So there are certainly, and then there are some people that think they want to be Jewish and they're like, but I can't get rid of Jesus. It's like, I'm sorry, thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys for the great questions and for giving us this opportunity. So, really quickly, before we close this thing, we have some fun little questions for you, Rabbi Lewis, just some dating questions.
Oh boy.
And it's just gonna be a little quick fun activity. And the only things you have to answer, just the one word between the two options we give you. So we're gonna give you a couple of options you have to pick.
Okay.
Okay, first, flowers or chocolates?
Flowers.
I hope you're taking notes, Jake.
Except we have cats and they're allergic, but
For sure, in
flowers.
theory.
Yeah.
Dinner at home or dinner out?
Dinner home.
Drive or be driven?
Drive. We should do the newlyweds game. Jake is answering right now.
Hike or rock climbing?
Hike.
Romantic getaway or staycation?
Romantic getaway.
Cocktails or wine?
Cocktails.
Movie or mini golfing?
Mini golfing.
Watching the sunrise or the sunset?
Sunset. West Coast boy.
Hot air balloon ride or scenic boat ride?
Boat ride. He's right.
Would you rather plan the surprise or be surprised?
Be surprised.
Okay, perfect. And last but certainly not least, Jew or non-Jew? Anyway, thank you everyone for all the time we have today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Touche the Podcast. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, want to give us a compliment, email touchethepodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome. Social, hit us follow on all streaming platforms so you can be notified every time an episode drops. And thank you guys so much for the time.
Shalom, everyone.
Shalom.
Shalom.